Today's video, we're going to talk about the pros and cons of gifting your house to your kids while you're living. This is often a conversation that comes up when parents are in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and just looking at overall asset protection. There's probate issues as well. So, Chris, tell us about some of the pros of why someone would want to gift their house while living to their kids.
Yeah, absolutely. The first one would be just out of efficiency for the asset transfer from the parents or parent to the kid. This would avoid probate entirely. So it would just be very smooth. Do it while you're living, while you're here. Second, for tax benefits here in PA, there's a inheritance tax of 4.5% for these kind of transfers. So that would go away as well. And then,
so hypothetically, house is worth $500,000. Gift it while living, you avoid $22,000 Pennsylvania inheritance tax hit. Mm-hmm. And assuming their estate's not over, right now the limit's like $13 million per spouse, then they would avoid federal tax. But and then just add in there real quick, to siblings that's 12% tax, and if you're passing money to grandkids, it's a 15% tax. So gifting it while living, you could avoid some serious, in Pennsylvania, for our example, inheritance tax. Perfect. And then you were going to say the third one, what I think was around asset protection.
Yeah, for Medicaid planning, to be eligible for some of these benefits, you can't have, there's levels for assets. I don't know off the top of my head.
So a primary home, if it's a primary home, and both spouses are living, it is, Pennsylvania, there's protection. Now, if it's a second spouse, one spouse has passed, it's a second spouse, work with an attorney because there are limits and rules specific to each state. But in generalities, if you've gifted that, 5 years and 1 day, and then you're applying for Medicaid benefits, and that house is out of your name, that house cannot be used against you. And hypothetically, if you gifted it to your kid could be renting it back to you, and it wouldn't affect your lifestyle as well. Now, there has to be a high level of trust, or you could have a rental agreement that they can't kick you out. But again, we're just focusing on the pros right now. Those are some of the pros. Now, if you are of higher net worth, Medicaid planning is not a thing because you're going to have the assets to pay for the healthcare, the long-term healthcare event regardless. So there'd be no point of gifting a home just for the sake of avoiding it because you're going to be paying out of pocket anyways. Right. So, okay, let's talk about the con. So obviously the first con, loss of control. Chris, talk us through, what are the risks, even if you trust your kid now, that kid's married. Give us some of the risks that could occur if you do give up control of the ownership of your home.
Yeah, I guess the biggest one's just, like you just said, you technically don't have the control yourself. So in a perfect world, this isn't a problem with good relationships, but sometimes dynamics can change, and you don't have the control. So you just want to make sure it's a good.
If you gift it to one kid, you have multiple kids, and you expect that kid's going to sell it up after your passing. If the relationship between siblings goes south, then that's out of your control to make sure everything's are equal. If the kid that you gift it to while living is married and then gets divorced, that's now an asset that without a prenuptial or postnuptial agreement now has to get split 50-50. And how's that kid going to come up with half the value of the house if you've pre-gifted it? So definitely a lot of considerations there that you have to be careful of for the loss, as far as the loss of control, case by case basis. So the biggest con I'm going to point out is capital gain tax, because under current tax law right now, let's say you bought a house, 30 years ago for $100,000 and it's now worth $500,000. If you gift it now, your kid's going to inherit the basis because it's a living gift. So when you pass and if your kid decides to sell the house, they're going to pay a capital gain tax 15 up to 23.8% federally of that $400,000 gain, versus if you left the house to their name, they get a step up in basis under current tax law. And so if they were in a 15% capital gain tax, 15% of $400,000, they would no longer have to pay. Their basis now would be $500,000 at death. So they'd avoid a $60,000 tax hit. So you'd be trying to save a $22,000 Pennsylvania inheritance tax hit, but you'd end up having to pay a $60,000 capital gain tax hit. So you have to weigh the pros and cons of when you're trying to save tax, you may end up paying more tax by gifting it now than in the future as well. Now, if you have a high cost basis, then that may not matter at all, and the Pennsylvania inheritance tax would be a much greater savings than the capital gain tax. But you have to really analyze those two.
I guess also if the intention's not to sell the home for some reason, maybe that could you come out ahead too.
Yeah.
Just trying to think of.
Absolutely. So not a decision to be taken lightly. Obviously, potential, family conflicts could be a big issue as well if you're gifting it to one kid, not the other. But wanted to lay out the pros and cons. If you're thinking about this, would recommend consult with a professional financial advisor, consult with an attorney. But there can be significant pros and significant cons. It's a case-by-case basis to whether you should do this while you're living or wait till you pass.